Welcome to your daily 180 Bible study. This week, we begin a study, What Does God Say About Marriage? In Matthew chapter 19, and I hope you have your Bibles and you'll turn them there, I want you to notice what happens in Matthew 19, verse number 3. Then the Pharisees also came to him, that is, coming to Jesus, testing him, and saying to him, Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason? And ultimately, Jesus is going to say, no, it's not lawful to divorce your wife for just any reason. That's sometimes misunderstood, and apparently I've communicated poorly in the past. I'm not saying that there's no reason to get a divorce, just the opposite. There is a valid reason to get a divorce, but you can't just decide, you know what, my wife's not as pretty as she used to be. You know what, I don't like the way she cooks anymore. You know what, I just don't enjoy her company anymore. Those are not reasons to get a divorce. God expects us to stay united. Well, what does God say about the idea of divorce? In Genesis chapter 2, we see that God was the one who officiated at the very first wedding ceremony. So that brings to light what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 19 and verse number 4. Have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female? And there's a couple of ideas there. Number one, here is the original pattern. Now, it may not be the pattern that people have always followed, but it was God's original ideal. One man and one woman for life. That's God's plan. And we'll point out later this week as well that the idea is a one man, a male, and a female. That's God's plan. That's the ideal that God had in mind. Now, with that in mind, we understand that God did not intend for people to get a divorce. Is there an exclusion? Do people have the right to get a divorce? Under certain circumstances, and we'll talk about this week. But think about how people have trivialized marriage. Imagine that you're at a beautiful wedding. I was just at a wedding a few days ago. And imagine that the receiving line there, people are coming through and shaking hands, and a lawyer comes through and hands a card to the bride and a card to the groom, and he says, I'm a lawyer, I specialize in divorce cases, and just when you're ready to get a divorce, make sure you give me a call. Well, people would be so upset with that, they'd say, that's disgusting, and they're right. When does it become acceptable just to say, you know, I don't like you anymore? A year later, 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later? No. We need to look back at what God has said about marriage. Join us again tomorrow.